Let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a wild case out of Farmington, New Mexico, kicking off on a very early November morning back in 2020. At the center of it, a third-grade teacher, a really tragic death, and a story that just seemed to completely change every single time detectives asked a question. Our goal today is to dig into the facts, map out the timeline, and really look at the fascinating behavioral psychology going on inside that interrogation room to see exactly how this whole mystery unraveled. Right off the bat, the officers rolling up to the scene had some immediate, serious suspicions about this supposed suicide. As one of the first responding officers literally muttered while processing the room, "If you ever find me with multiple stabs in my chest, I didn't do it myself." I mean, that perfectly captures the massive disconnect between what they were told happened and what their own eyes were showing them. When seasoned cops walk into a room and instantly say something like that, you just know the physical evidence isn't matching the story. Part 1. A horrific discovery. So Heather, again, she's a third-grade teacher, paints this picture of a sudden, heartbreaking tragedy. But the physical reality of the room immediately threw up massive red flags. The 911 call comes in at 5:40 a.m. The victim is our 49-year-old husband, Robert. Now, they had only been married for 12 weeks. They should still be in that absolute honeymoon phase, right? But Heather claims Robert stabbed himself with a kitchen steak knife. And get this, before the medical examiners could even fully analyze the untouched scene, officers actually helped move Robert's body using a blanket just to clear the doorway. It was a choice they'd regret pretty quickly, because once he was moved, they discovered multiple, deep puncture wounds to his chest. Now, put your armchair detective hats on for a second and really ask yourself how you would react in this situation. Because Heather's response to her husband's mortal injuries completely defies typical human behavior. In a real crisis, your autonomic nervous system kicks in, right? You panic, you dial 911 instantly. But instead, Heather showed this bizarrely calm detachment. By her own admission to police, after her husband supposedly announced he'd stabbed himself, she said she went out to the couch to just scroll on her phone. She literally mentioned she didn't want to get into bed and risk breaking her new glasses. I mean, wow. It's a jarring detail that forces us to question the logic of that entire night.
Part 2. Shifting the timeline.
This next part is exactly why detectives always separate witnesses. When you try to map out Heather's claims linearly, it exposes some massive temporal impossibilities, especially when we're talking about a deadly wound. Let's break it down. Heather claimed that around 11 p.m., she was warming up pie for Robert, and she says that's the only time he could have gone to the kitchen to grab the knife. Okay? Yet she says it wasn't until around 3 a.m. that he complained of pain and she actually saw blood. Then she says she found him unresponsive at 5 a.m., but she didn't call 911 until 5:42 a.m. Think about that. That means there are hours of unaccounted for time where a man is allegedly just sitting there with fatal chest wounds going entirely unnoticed. And here is an absolutely crucial point. Heather actively chose to clean up the crime scene with a washcloth, claiming she just didn't realize 3 chest punctures were a big deal. When detectives pressed her on why she'd clean her husband's stab wounds instead of immediately getting life-saving medical help, her defense was basically, well, they looked superficial. But let's look at this from a behavioral standpoint. Cleaning up a scene? That's a classic sign of cognitive load and guilt. She's attempting to manage the visual narrative before the cops arrive, rather than acting on the basic, immediate instinct of a spouse to just call for help. Part 3. A house divided. So, as you'll see, there is a massive disconnect between Heather's portrayal of this flawless honeymoon phase and the harsh reality the neighbors actually heard. Heather repeatedly insisted to detectives, "We don't argue. It never gets physical." Not a single argument. But, police canvassed the neighborhood, and an earwitness directly contradicted this. They reported hearing loud yelling, probably both male and female voices, coming from the house right around 3 or 4 in the morning. And that perfectly aligns with the window of time Robert sustained his fatal injuries. To verify things, police talked to the other adults in the house, Heather's son Tyler and his girlfriend Elizabeth. And Tyler's testimony unintentionally shatters his mom's pristine narrative. He revealed a household that was actually fueled by heavy alcohol consumption and recent physical altercations. While Heather tried to paint a picture of a quiet evening having 1 gin and ginger ale, Tyler revealed Robert was actually drinking up to a 5th of vodka every single night. And even more importantly, Tyler totally shattered the illusion of his mother as this non-violent person. He casually mentioned that she had physically struck him during a family argument just 2 weeks prior. Add to that Elizabeth hearing Heather crying at 4:30 a.m., which is nearly an hour before she called 911, and the timeline just crumbles even further. And then we get this fascinating psychological moment caught on tape. The police don't even really have to press her because her own son naturally takes on the role of interrogator. He just refuses to buy the physically impossible story she's selling. While they were sitting together in the holding room at the police station, Heather kept randomly blurting out that she felt guilty. Tyler, who is clearly frustrated and confused by the physical impossibility of a suicide where the knife is just neatly put away, challenged her directly on it. It really shows how the people closest to her are rejecting these behavioral anomalies right to her face.
Part 4. The forensic reality.
3. That is the number of liters of blood that had pooled inside Robert's chest cavity. And that entirely explains why officers found almost zero blood on the bed despite these lethal injuries. One of the biggest mysteries for the initial responding officers was how a man could suffer 3 deep chest punctures while lying in bed, yet leave almost no blood on the sheets. Well, the autopsy provided the grim answer. The wounds were so deep they collapsed his lungs and completely severed a coronary artery, causing massive internal bleeding. When we put her claims side by side with the forensic findings, her story completely falls apart. I mean, a man simply does not sever a coronary artery, wipe the knife clean, put it away, and then casually eat a slice of pie. The autopsy determined Robert would have died within minutes to hours. That entirely invalidates the idea that he stabbed himself around 11 p.m. and was casually chatting about the pain at 3 a.m. Furthermore, the supposed weapon was found back in the kitchen butcher block, wiped completely clean of blood, though crucially, it still retained Robert's DNA on the blade. You just do not inflict those types of catastrophic, incapacitating injuries on yourself and then get up to do kitchen chores. The detectives also noted a major psychological disconnect here. If Robert truly wanted to take his own life, he had incredibly fast, highly lethal options available right in his bedroom, which makes a kitchen steak knife a really illogical choice. Investigators searching the house found an absolute armory of alternative weapons, a firearm right on top of the furniture in the bedroom, a samurai sword, a Spartan sword, a cabinet full of prescription pills. Choosing a relatively small kitchen steak knife, stabbing oneself 3 times through the chest cavity with incredible force, and then cleaning it up, that just doesn't fit the profile of a suicidal individual surrounded by much quicker, less painful methods.
Part 5. The final arrest.
Now, because there is only a single state lab in New Mexico processing this kind of complex forensic and digital evidence, this case moved at a glacial pace. For nearly 5 years, Heather continued to live her life, working as a 3rd-grade teacher. But on April 1st, 2025, authorities finally arrived at her school. A stunning piece of digital evidence finally prompted investigators to take Heather into custody right outside her workplace. Investigators had unearthed a hidden video on Heather's own phone, dated just 6 days before Robert's death, and it definitively proved that her repeated claims of a conflict-free marriage were a complete fabrication. She had secretly recorded an argument with Robert where he was clearly distressed, calling her mean and stupid. This digital smoking gun completely dismantled her core defense that they were in this perpetual honeymoon phase and never raised their voices at one another. It provided the exact context of household tension that the neighbors had reported hearing the night of the murder. So the state officially moved forward. They charged her not just for the death, but for the calculated cleanup of the crime scene that completely derailed the initial response. By wiping the knife clean, placing it back in the butcher block, cleaning his wounds with a washcloth, and purposefully delaying that 911 call. The prosecution argues she engaged in deliberate tampering with evidence to build her suicide narrative. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pivotal question. How will a jury weigh a shifting, inconsistent story against the indisputable laws of human anatomy? Heather maintains her innocence and is currently out on bond awaiting trial. But when a narrative requires a man to perform physically impossible feats with a severed coronary artery, the silent testimony of the forensic evidence speaks incredibly loud. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other secrets are hidden right there in the data?